My friends, great news for Ukraine in this video. Are you ready to knock them out cold? Let's go. My friends, the Ukrainian counteroffensive is well underway. Before we look at the Ukrainian successes on the battlefield, I want to guide your attention to how this news is published throughout the world. Because you remember during the first days of the counteroffensive, Russian channels and media was filled with destroyed Ukrainian columns of Leopard tanks. This was all false. It was one column, it was destroyed, but Russians made it out of 10 different columns and a failed counteroffensive. This is Ground News. It's a news comparison site. I use Ground News as my tool to find out, for example, if the news has any Russian narrative in it, if it's far right leaning, for example. Top Ukraine news. Ukraine says heavy battles going on after first counteroffensive gains. Let's look at this one. How is news made? Some Ukrainian official makes a statement and then all of the news agencies in the world pick it up. As we can see, 215 different news agencies have posted about this information, and 32 of them are leaning right. And at the first days of the counteroffensive, these right-leaning Russian narrative news outlets shared the destroyed Ukrainian columns the most. It was pure Russian propaganda. You can see the bias distribution. 60% of the sources are center, which is what I'm looking at. As we can see, right-leaning with a red background here, and we have Times of India. India being one of the semi-friends of Russia right now, buying oil and weapons from Russia. I'm not surprised. There's of course TASS, the Russian media outlet here. For example, if we click news articles, we click right, then we see all right-leaning news article headlines, and immediately we see Ukraine claims recapture of 7 villages in early stages of counteroffensive. Claims hints that they haven't captured, and they claim it's not the truth, it's only a Ukrainian claim. If we click center, immediately we see Kiev retakes 7 villages. There's no claim, it's a fact they have taken these villages. So we can see a right-leaning news site headlines perhaps discredit Ukraine. Ukraine says 7 villages retaken in tough offensive, the Daily Telegraph. French President Macron said that the counteroffensive might take weeks, if not months, and then he talks about negotiations, as he always does. In this phase right now, we should not talk about negotiations. It's only good for Russia, because Russia is slowly turning to be the losing side, and the losing side wants negotiations. Macron is always there to negotiate. In my eyes, Macron, with his negotiation plans, is pleasing the Russian narrative. And what do you know, the Daily Telegraph is listed as right on Ground News. You can use Ground News on your computer or on your phone. It's incredibly easy and straightforward to use, and it gives you answers immediately. Each and every one of you who is consuming the news is on an information warfare battleground between Russian narrative and Ukrainian narrative. This is why Ground News is incredibly important right now to get information about Russia-Ukrainian war without being manipulated on either way. Go to ground.news/Artur or click the link in the description below to stay fully informed about breaking news, for example, Russia-Ukrainian war. Compare coverage and avoid media bias and the propaganda. We'll start with the good news with visual proof of liberated settlements. We'll start with the axis, of course, where Ukrainian probing forces have had the most success. Velika Novosilka axis. The settlement of Starozheve, of course, liberated a few days ago. Reports came in, we were all happy and cheered, but now the visual confirmation has come in. In this video you can see it. Starozheve liberated from tyranny and occupation. Congratulations, Ukraine. We go a little bit south from Starozheve and we have Makarivka. Again, reports came in a few days ago that this was liberated, but here you can see actual visual confirmations of the settlement being freed. Russians actually counterattacked this settlement. When they loosened Skuchne, Starozheve, they only pulled back, but with Makarivka they counterattacked with armor and infantry and actually aviation with glide bombs. Heavy battles were going on around this settlement. Perhaps the reason the front line has settled here is because of this Russian counterattack. Ukrainians defended well. We have reports of that counterattack. How did it go? A number of Russian military bloggers like Semyon Begov and War Gonzo all have reported similarly that these Russian counterattacks have failed. According to the latest reports, the front line is about 700 meters south, so this map is pretty accurate. As the time of making this video, we have yet not gotten any reports of the Staromayorsk liberation or Urozhaine's liberation. And if Ukraine liberates these settlements, going south from here will be a bit more tricky because, as I mentioned in the last video, Russians blew up the Klushova Dam and this water reservoir has emptied into the basin of this small stream right here. going all the way north to Urozhaine. Following south on this axis, a little bit more difficult now. Wet grounds. If we go a little bit west from this axis, there is Novodarivka. Again, reports came in a few days ago of the liberation of this settlement, but here you can see visual confirmation again. As I said, I'll be showing you all of these settlements with visual confirmation. Congratulations, Ukraine. Overall, all of these settlements were liberated in a window of 36 hours, which is incredibly fast. And after that, there has been an operational pause on the Ukrainian side, partially due because Russians counterattacked and partially because this offensive operation is done differently than Kherson, and we will compare them later. And the last settlement, and one of the most recent ones that was liberated by Ukraine, was Levadne, right here, even more southwest from Novodarivka. We don't have visual confirmation yet, but the reports are very believable. After it was liberated, Ukrainians tonight actually made some more gains. As you can see, this area where I'm with my cursor, there were Russian positions here southeast from Levadne, and Ukrainians have taken these positions, cleared out the trenches and foxholes. I saw the video, used grenades, machine guns. Very effective work. Overall, on Velika Novosilka axis, it has been quite a calm day actually, compared to that 36-hour window when Ukraine liberated three settlements. After that, they have been dealing with regrouping, reorganizing, assessing the situation. What I want to say is there's an operational pause. At least for a day it has been. We get reports that on the right flank, Ukraine is working with clearing up the forest belts. You know, it's mostly fields with these 3 to 4 tree thickness forest belts that have Russian positions on them, and we have reports that the Ukrainian artillery is incredibly active on this right flank of the Velika Novosilka axis. Another reason for this slight tactical pause might be that Ukrainian command wants to see the movements of the Russian reserves, wants to make sure where they are at before moving out their own reserves. Of course, we are not seeing any Ukrainian reserves in this axis, only probing forces. And I'm here to say actually that this Velika Novosilka has had the most success, but it doesn't mean that the main Ukrainian offensive will start from this axis. It has just had the most success with the probing forces. It doesn't say anything. If anyone else claims that this is where it's at, it's not true. We don't know. Ukraine might move their reserves in the east if they want to. Very possible. If we go southwest from Velika Novosilka axis, we get the settlement of Hulia-Polya, and south from this settlement, there have been reports from Russian military bloggers that last night Ukrainians ramped up their offensives on these two settlements, Marfapil and Dorozhnyanka. They report that Ukrainian artillery was incredibly active, but there has not been yet such probing force that we see on Velika Novosilka axis. It might come after the artillery barrage ends. Yesterday I saw some reports of Ukrainian forces being near Tokmak. I'm not sure if you have seen these reports, and I'm here to tell you this is just a blatant lie. I don't know who circled that information, but Tokmak is about 50 to 60 kilometers from the front. There is no way there's any Ukrainian forces near here. It's a major Russian stronghold in the area, a logistical center. There's a lot more work to be done to reach that area. Again, I'm being very conservative with my reports because I also got very carried away during the Kherson offensive, where me, as well as every other military blogger I saw, was shouting out liberated settlements before they happened. It's not going to happen this time. Only believable reports. The bulk of the Ukrainian reserves, as I said, has not engaged the enemy. They have even not started moving yet. I think the Ukrainian command will wait where the Russian reserves are headed at, and then they will make their decision. It could be east, it could be south, it could be anywhere. What it's not going to be is over the Dnieper River, because Ukraine does not have the capability to cross such a large water body. The force we're talking about here is up to 3,000 armored vehicles. That is ACPs, MRAPs, tanks, everything. And the most important amongst these numbers are anti-mining vehicles and special tanks, special armored vehicles, which is a tank, for example, with this, I don't know how it's called in English, this metal thing on top which crushes dragon's teeth or fills the anti-tank ditches. This special equipment is even more necessary than the tanks and infantry fighting vehicles themselves to get over these obstacles, which has to be done under fire. And this force hasn't moved yet. It is the biggest fighting force we have seen in European soil since 1945. A little known detail that nobody talks about with these columns, convoys, or at all working with any kind of military vehicle is the exhausts. Tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, even trucks produce a hell amount of visible exhaust, breathable exhaust. You breathe it in. When you're spending any kind of time on top of a tank, there's no way you're not breathing in that polluted air. I've been there and it's really bad. I mean, if you're a smoker, it's still bad. I smoked in the military and it's a lot worse. And you spend hours, days and months like that. And nobody talks about this. Yes, you get used to it. But you can really sometimes feel yourself getting dizzy from the fumes. Imagine you're on a tank, the fumes come out from the back of the tank. If the tank is moving, it creates an air vacuum at the back of it because the tank's body is moving the air away. I've seen how it works. That means the fumes that come out of the back of the tank are sucked in by the vacuum, and if you're sitting on top of it, they're immediately in your face. It's some kind of weird physics. But you breathe those in for months. Here are the Russian losses of the past 24 hours, 14th of June. 680 KIAs of Russian personnel. These numbers again a little bit smaller than we saw at the beginning phases of this counteroffensive because, as I said, there's a slight tactical pause right now and it immediately reflects in the numbers. 8 tanks and 11 armored personnel vehicles, still a lot destroyed, but the biggest thing here is artillery systems. Again, as I've said many times before, one of the main targets of any kind of Ukrainian units right now. A lot of Ukrainian losses come from Russian artillery. Most, actually. Take out the artillery, you remove Ukrainian losses. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, very good. Anything else than a 0 is a victory. 15 UAVs, 13 cruise missiles because Russia has been attacking Ukrainian cities again, 9 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 5 special equipment. Now this special equipment is what is incredibly important for Ukraine to destroy and what is incredibly important for Ukraine to have to traverse Russian dragon's teeth, mines, trenches, ditches. Special equipment is what is needed for that. Biden's administration has announced a new military aid package towards Ukraine. Let's watch what's in it. Surface-to-air missile systems, NASAMS, incredibly important. Stinger anti-aircraft systems, always needed. Additional ammunition for high-mobility artillery rockets. HIMARS, yeah, I'm glad to see it. HIMARS is working daily. One of the most used weapons on the Ukrainian side is HIMARS. One of the most overused, because they don't have that many systems, and they're pounding day and night. One big advantage, amongst many advantages over regular artillery, is that you can shoot them and the barrel doesn't get worn out because it doesn't have a barrel in that sense. Even Western artillery, American M777 and any other artillery, the barrels get worn out, and that's a big issue because Ukraine shoots a lot more than they shoot out of those barrels, and then they get imprecise and actually they explode sometimes. HIMARS doesn't have that issue. Pound it day and night, it works and it's precise. The minus is that it's expensive, very expensive. 155mm and 105mm artillery rounds, one of the most important things right here. Yes, HIMARS is doing pinpoint accuracy work, but there's so few of them, they can only hit high-value targets. Artillery is what does most of the KIAs on the Russian side. 15 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. I love seeing this because the first days of the counteroffensive, we saw Ukraine losing a column. You know this propaganda that Russia was spreading that there was many columns? There was one column. There were Leopards, there were Bradleys destroyed. By now we have gotten the reports that there were about 15 destroyed Bradleys. And USA is like, here you go, another 15. There were mistakes made on the Ukrainian side, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't support you. Then Striker armored personnel carriers, hooray. Javelin anti-armor systems, TOW missiles, 84 anti-armor systems, over 22 million rounds of small arms, ammunition and grenades. Again, this doesn't really excite people, small arms rounds, it doesn't do much. I just watched a video how near Levadne, southeast, they took these Russian positions. An entire mag goes into a foxhole. They don't see in the foxhole, there's a tarp. The entire mag goes in, grenade goes in, another mag, hide, kaboom, foxhole cleared. 2 mags for a foxhole, and there are hundreds if not thousands of foxholes. You don't know what's in it, you're not gonna poke your head in. You're just gonna full send until your mag is empty into that hole, and then a grenade also. So that 22 million rounds is what does it. Demolition munitions for obstacle clearing. Yes, Dragon's Teeth and the endless amount of mines that Russia has laid. This is necessary. Tactical secure communication support equipment, spare parts and other field equipment. In this video we can see what artillery barrage does to a dry forest in the summer. Most of the forest is burned and it's a wildfire on the front. It's not an issue in the winter or in the fall or spring, even when there is more rain or more wetness or moisture in the ground. But now it's a dry season in Ukraine. One artillery hit starts a wildfire and there are thousands per day, so front line will be burned. And it's sad to see. Wild animals, for example, they are suffering heavily on this. And this will continue for many months. So if you look, I'm curious to see if you look at the satellite photos in August or September, for example, on the front line, I'm sure you could see the greenery turned into black belt like that on the front line. It's all burnt. In this video we can see the Panzer III doing what it's supposed to do. It's retrieving a Leopard tank. It's incredibly important because a damaged Leopard is not a destroyed Leopard. This is why these shops, repair shops and repair factories in Poland are so important that I was talking about for 6 months at least before the tanks even were announced to Ukraine. The most important thing was logistics, and it still is. Take it this way, Russia has horrible field medicine. They almost don't have it at all. That means any Russia wounded in action, any kind of soldier with any kind of wound, there's a very high percentage that it turns into a killed in action because he doesn't get any medicine. He's usually left by his own. We have seen videos like that, or he's actually executed by his own. In Ukraine, field medicine, is usually turned into recovered and active duty again, going back. Soldier gets wounded, and if it's not lethal or it doesn't affect him in any long-term way, he can go back to fight. And it adds up to thousands and maybe tens of thousands of personnel. It's same with the equipment. Russia also doesn't have repair shops set up on the field. A damaged Russian BMP is an abandoned and destroyed Russian BMP. Same goes with tanks, with BTRs. I was hammering this in for so long that there is no point in sending these Leopards unless these countries are able to set up repair shops, repair factories and mechanics in Poland or in Western Ukraine. Because there's a lot of minor damages that will knock a Leopard out of battle, but it can go back into the battle after 1 month if it got new tracks, if it got a new barrel. So these tanks will be trickling back into the armed forces of Ukraine. It just takes a month or two. See on the map here, this is the settlement of Energodar, right next to Novakhovka. And this map, of course, has been updated because if we look at the reservoir now on satellite images, you'll see it later in this video. The Novakhovka reservoir does not look like this. It looks more like a semi-desert right now. But the thing is, this is a Russian-occupied settlement, and we have a video where the water has receded and these weird stick things came out of the water. They seem to be attached to an anti-tank mines. What are they? They're actually Russian PDM-1 mines that are meant for stopping amphibious assaults. So if, let's say, a BMP which is supposed to float on water is floating on a shallow water trying to perform an amphibious assault and it goes against that stick, boom, explosion upwards and the BMP is gone. Russians were really expecting an attack over this water body, Novakhovka reservoir. Ukrainians never had this capability. They don't have it now, but Russians were expecting it, they were preparing for it. This shows how effective Ukrainian frightening tactics have been, that Russians are expecting an attack from everywhere, anywhere. The pressure went so big that they blew the dam, they couldn't take it anymore. I mean, look at this water body. Ukrainians couldn't even attack over the Dnieper River, but look at this, it's a wide water body, and Russians were getting ready to fight on these shallows, to fight on these shores. Last night, a locomotive depot in Russian-occupied Melitopol was destroyed. In the previous video, I mentioned how Ukrainian partisans have been activated. They blew the Russian railway from 2 places, one in Crimea and one in the Melitopol area, actually severing Russian railway connections to the front line. And we know that Russian army only works if they have working logistics with the rail, because truck transport is too slow for the Russians and rail is where it's at. Well, the railway has been destroyed for at least a week. Now the partisans are actively striking the locomotives. Taking away anything connected to the rail is seriously damaging the Russian war effort. This directly contributes to the attrition on the front lines. This contributes to the fact that Russians have to abandon their positions because A, they don't have enough anti-armor weaponry, they don't have enough ammunition, small arms fire even, or artillery rounds. They have to abandon. How can you fight if you don't have ammunition? Patriot anti-air system producer Rehi has announced that they will ramp up the production to 12 batteries per year. Additional 5 batteries will be delivered to Ukraine before the end of this 2023. Patriot is not just another anti-air system, it's the anti-air system, because you remember all of the drama with the Russian Kinzhal missile. Everybody was afraid of it because Russians hyped it up for years. For years it was their main Wunderwaffe, even when the Ukrainian invasion starts and all of the Russian illusions start breaking down. The picture is broken. Russia is not the second army in the world. It's not even the second army in Ukraine. It's the second army in Russia now. That's the running joke. Well, they still had their Kinzhal missile, which is connected to their nuclear program modernization. The Soviet nuclear program, Russia modernized it. And it was all based on Kinzhal, the new supersonic missile that cannot be shot down. We put all of our nuclear weapons on it, we'll fly it to the United States and they cannot do anything. Well, this Patriot took the Kinzhals down like it was no problem for it. For Russians, this was a huge shock. They have poured billions, we're talking USD, billions into this Kinzhal program, and now it just failed to a Patriot. So Ukraine needs more of those, Estonia needs more of those Patriot systems, but we don't have the money for it, unfortunately. It's a bit more expensive than we can afford, but I'm glad to see this will be ramped up, sent to Ukraine. Russian missile attacks will have less and less efficiency in the future. For the very first time in this Russian invasion of Ukraine, Putin has gathered together all and most of the prominent Russian military bloggers. Some of the people sitting around this table you see right here, they're anti-Kremlin. They are actually people who post true outcomes of the battles, which is not what Ministry of Defense of Russia does. They say we destroyed 5,000 Ukrainian tanks, and some of the people around this table actually in their telegrams to Russians post that Russia didn't destroy 5,000 Ukrainian tanks, they lost 100 tanks. So Putin gathered all of them together, and of course they accepted, because what else can they do? They will be flying out of the window. And now Putin decided to be a military blogger for these guys. And it's hilarious. We gotta watch it together, my friends. There was an attack on the Shakhtarsk direction in the morning, up to 100 men, 4 tanks, 2 armored vehicles. On the Vremivka direction also. So what Putin is doing right now is reading military updates to Russian military bloggers, to people who have more direct access to the frontline information than Putin does. Putin has a lot of sugarcoating coming to him, a lot of filters the information goes through before reaching him. He doesn't like negative news, so he doesn't receive it. These military bloggers know this thing way before Putin is gonna read it to them, so for me it's very ironic. Let's only hope that Putin will never listen to these military bloggers, because then he would actually get the accurate information. On the Minka direction, also several tanks, several armored vehicles, attacks in several directions, several tanks, several armored vehicles were destroyed, personnel were hit, but did not reach the front line. So he's saying, oh, the Ukrainian attack failed. Let me think. He's like, they lost over 160 tanks and over 360 armored vehicles. These numbers are insane. I get 160 tanks is what Ukraine is using on the whole front for probing forces right now, I think. Nowhere near such numbers. But look again how Putin is delivering these numbers to actual experts. He just made it up. He's like, they lost about 160 tanks. He makes up the numbers while he goes, and it's because everyone sitting on this table knows that this is a blatant lie he just delivered. They know the situation. They're military bloggers. They follow the frontline information. Russian soldiers fought on the front line, and Putin is here delivering them this information. I find this, being a military blogger myself, incredibly ironical. 360 armored vehicles during this time. So the offensive is going on, and the results to date are, as I just mentioned. And look at these faces. These are the Russian military vloggers. They are like, you are full of, you know what, Mr. Putin. But I can't say anything because I don't want to fly out the window. They don't have a choice but to listen to this garbage. This is gold. Putin was like, was there anything else that I should mention to these professionals? Yes, da. Watching this it delivers a certain amount of cringe in my system. Now we will watch Prigozhin not dressed in uniform, military uniform, but like a civilian. Honestly, when information comes from Putin or from Prigozhin, I tend to believe Prigozhin, because he's actually present. He's also full of garbage, but he sees things with his own eyes. If he lies because he knows the truth, and he chooses to lie. Perhaps Putin doesn't even know, because he just cannot handle the truth. In a few words, what is happening? The following is happening. Ukraine began an offensive. I'm saying all as it is. With the offensive, they do everything competently. They're cutting off certain areas in the Zaporozhye direction. Meanwhile, they're covering their left flank, right for us, left for them. Thank you, Prigozhin, for exactly where the battles are taking place now. Ruzzia and so on. Yeah. They're covering the left flank. The area they managed to take, as they evaluate at 100 square kilometers. It is. That's the whole area of the whole front Ukraine has liberated in the past week, which is impressive. In my calculations, it's even a bit more. They're moving carefully, calmly. That carefully and calmly, it's incredibly important here. They lost a couple of Leopards and Bradleys carefully and calmly, because nothing about the Izium Kharkiv offensive was careful or calm. Ukrainians stormed head into the Russian positions, and luckily the Russians crumbled. If they wouldn't have, Ukrainian losses would have been sky high. Ukrainians stormed head on into Kherson. Again, Russians pulled out. If it wouldn't have gone how it went, sky high losses. Right now, Ukrainians are doing things differently. There's no head on storming. There's no overstretching the supply lines. Advancements are slow, steady, minimizing the losses. There are losses, as he mentions, also Leopards and Bradleys. We have seen them also. This offensive is done differently than the last two successful offensives Ukraine has done. They were successful, but the price was high for Ukraine. They don't want to repeat that. There are normal combat losses. I'm not saying this to promote them, but to judge sensibly. So it's early to celebrate. We need to mobilize, get together. I recently have really started to agree with Prigozhin, because he has changed. Ever since his troops left the combat zone, he has changed his entire mannerisms. He now gives credit to the Ukrainian armed forces, because credit is due. Ukrainian armed forces are incredibly effective compared to what they have and what they're doing. And Prigozhin sees it. He's on the battlefield. He's on the front. He knows his enemy now. And he knows if Russia doesn't mobilize, they have no way out of this situation. Even if they do mobilize, it just takes longer for Ukraine to win. And understand that they won't stop until they either get beaten or get some sort of positive results. Liberate the entire Ukraine. For now, in my view, and according to the evaluation of the military on the ground, not enough is being done to counter the enemy. Golden words right now, I gotta say. Everything I heard, I can argue against nothing here, because Russia is not doing enough, because decisions are made by Shoigu and Putin, both of who don't get the information, not because it's also not delivered to them, but because they have chose not to get it. They have chose not to accept negative information, because anyone who has tried to deliver it is out of the window or fired. Putin has created an atmosphere around him that doesn't let real info through. It's his own fault. That's why not enough is done. My friends, if you want a cool shirt like I'm wearing right now, I love Ukraine, and in the heart it's a drone dropping ammunition. My merch store, estoniansoldier.com, a lot of cool designs there. Go and pick your favorite for you and also your grandmother. Suits both. And now it is time you have all been waiting for. Time to say some patron names in a way you've never heard before. If you're a first timer, plug your ears because they will bleed. I'll thank 5 new patrons. Dirk Felske, Mikke Tines, Steven William Pierke, Jerry Rogers, Jon Raphaelson. Thank you to these 5 people. If you like my channel, the Patreon link is in the description below. Also check out my Twitter account 3 times a day. You get the most important news about Russo-Ukrainian war in a very compact form. Also Instagram is in the description below. I have some big plans that I cannot show yet, but you might see them on my Instagram. I'll see you there. Until my next video, my friends, Slava Ukraini!